This is Point of Inquiry for Friday, November 13th, 2009.
Welcome to Point of Inquiry. I'm DJ Grothy. Point of Inquiry is the radio show and the podcast of the Center for Inquiry, a think tank advancing reason, science, and secular values in public affairs and at the grassroots. My guest this week is Banachek, a world-famous thought reader, mind reader. He's written numerous books on mentalism, including the influential Psychological Subtleties, and he's invented various magic and mentalism effects, including Penn and Teller's Bullet Catch and the original Buried Alive. He's often sought out by various top entertainers around the world as a consultant, including Penn and Teller, David Blaine, Lance Burton, James Randi, Chris Angel, others. He's received the Entertainer of the Year award 2 years in a row from the Association for the Promotion of Campus Activities, and he's also been the recipient of the coveted Psychic Entertainer Association Creativity Award. He's well known for fooling scientists at Washington University into believing that his supposed psychic abilities were genuine during the Project Alpha hoax of the early 1980s. Welcome to Point of Inquiry, Banachek.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We've been wanting you on the show for so long, so much to talk about: mentalism, skepticism, Project Alpha, lots of stuff. Let's start off talking about your mentalism. First, do you like the term mentalist or mind reader or psychic entertainer?
You know, it's interesting. It's only been in the last few years, I think, that people think they understand what a mentalist is because of the TV show The Mentalist.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about that is it's very distant from what a true mentalist is. We basically take our five known senses. We create the illusion of a sixth sense, of course, all structured around magic. And we simulate what a psychic would actually do. Now, there are certain mentalists out there that will want you to believe they're genuine. There are some mentalists out there that only can get away with what they do by having people have a preconceived notion that they're actually genuine. But we're not. I mean, we're all magicians, and it's just a different subcategory of magic. And a lot of mentalists don't even like the term magician related to us, but that's what it is. It's another category of magic.
So you use the term mentalist to describe yourself?
You know what? I do. More recently, I've gotten more comfortable with it, but most lay people have no clue what a mentalist is. It's only since the TV show like Phenomenon
right.
and the actual TV show The Mentalist itself has come out that they start to understand it. Prior to that, I called myself a thought reader, which is very different than a mind reader, and I would explain it and put it in context for people that I can't read your mind. And I would give specific examples. I'd say, if there was a woman sitting with her husband on a park bench, and a pretty woman went jogging by, and the husband turned and looked, and the wife slapped the husband in the face. Well, if you were watching this, you would know what the husband was thinking. You know what the wife was thinking, right? You haven't read their minds, but you have read their thoughts. And that's what I do. I read thoughts, not minds. You come up to me after shows, say, read my mind? Can't do it. But if you punch me in the face, I might know what you thought about the show.
Great. Okay, so you're a thought reader, you're a mentalist, you've kind of conceded this sore point among some people in the art that, hey, it's all magic tricks, it's all magical effects, it's just couched in these more kind of paranormal, theatrical presentations, fine. You got into all of this at a really young age, right?
I really well, it depends what you say by that, because a lot of magicians get started when they're like, 13, 14, 15.
Oh, like a magic kid or something.
Yeah, exactly. And start going to conventions with their dad or their uncle or somebody like that. I started when I was 16 years old. I mean, I picked up a book by James the Amazing Randi. I didn't even really start performing at that point. I picked up a book by James the Amazing Randi, a good friend of ours, of course, and everybody listening to this will know who he is. And it was the truth about Uri Geller. And up to that point, I had believed Geller was genuine. I mean, I was abandoned when I was a kid in South Africa, 2 brothers, a year and 3 years old, pretty much raised him by myself. So anything adults told me, I believed. I mean, hey, who would know? The adults would know. And they convinced me that Geller was genuine. I remember he came to Cape Town, Springbok Radio. I listened to him on the radio. We had no TVs in South Africa at that time. And I heard Geller, and I convinced myself I could actually bend a pin with my mind, very minutely, but I had bent it. And It wasn't until I picked up Randy's book that it opened up a whole new world for me. And I was a little bit upset, a little bit angry at the time, because nobody had given me a different perspective about what this might be.
It sounds like, though, that this book, rather than just only telling you the truth about Uri Geller, it kind of radicalized you.
It did a lot for me. I mean, I because of my upbringing, because of being banded in South Africa with my two brothers, raising them by myself, sitting in the back of a classroom with a heavy coat on in the middle of summer, afraid the teacher was going to call me. I mean, I was socially inept. And when I read the book, not only was I angry, but I started to come up with ways to bend and move items myself, and other things too, like making the clock go off early, or the bell go off early, so we could get out of school early. I got attention from other students at that time too. They started to bring me silverware from the cafeteria, and I started to bend that as well. I got suspended for that for a little bit. They went to plastic silverware until I graduated. But it really, really changed my life, so much so that after a little bit, I wrote Randy a letter and said, look, if you ever need a kid to try to fool scientists, I'd be happy to do it.
Wow, and that, in fact, that's the perfect entree into discussing Project Alpha at my alma mater, Washington University. You were involved in, well, how to say it, you were teaching scientists there a lesson in how easy it is to fool smart people with these conjuring tricks. These scientists at WashU, they set up a project investigating psychic phenomena. Well, tell me how you got in the mix there.
Yeah, you see, for years scientists had lamented that the reason there was no positive documentation of ESP was simply because of lack of funding. Well, it was Randy's contention, and mine at the time as well, that it had nothing to do with lack of funding. Didn't matter how much money they had. If they went in with a pro-biased opinion, if they went in believing, they would not use proper scientific protocol. Basically, what they would be doing is trying to document their own belief system. And even some of the scientists, some of the parapsychologists said, look, if you think you can introduce a magician into the lab, go ahead and try it, see if you can. You won't be able to do it. We also believe that the scientists would think that they were too smart, that because they had a PhD, they would think that they couldn't be fooled, and therefore they would not accept the expert opinion of somebody who could detect the trickery, like the amazing Randy. So it was something that we felt needed to be done at the time, and the opportunity presented itself when Washington University was given $500,000 by McDonnell Douglas to study any phenomena they wanted, but it had to be a paranormal-type phenomenon. And it was given to Peter Phillips, a gentleman there who was a physics professor, and he basically decided he was going to study PKMB, and he put out an Associated Press article that said, look, I'm looking for kids who can bend metal or move objects with their mind. I wrote to them, and I was accepted.
Wow. So you and your friend Mike Edwards, you beguiled these credulous scientists into believing that you had real paranormal abilities. What kind of abilities did you, in a fake way, demonstrate to them?
Well, you say my friend Mike Edwards. At the time, I didn't know Mike. Mike had already been accepted prior to myself, and the only thing Mike knew how to do was to bend a key. Randy didn't know Mike up until that point, so he wrote Randy, I think he wrote or called Randy, I don't remember for sure, and said, look, I've been accepted. What do I do at this point? And Randy just said, stay on board. I've got some thoughts. Been working on this for a while. And I know another young gentleman who's just been accepted. The name is Stephen Shaw, which is my regular name. And Mike and I hit it off, and we did become very good friends. Now, in the early days, we didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know if they were going to be one-way mirrors. We didn't know how they were trying to detect the trickery. We assumed that they were trying to check and make sure that we were genuine first, so they would be looking for the trickery.
But you didn't know how stringent the protocols were. You were kind of going in blind.
We didn't know what they were hiding from us. So in the early days, the bends were very minute, very almost like a millimeter or something like that, because they would measure the spoons at the tip and in the center and at the ends. And our bends were very, very slight, things that could not even be seen on camera. It wasn't until later when we started realizing how much freedom we had that we really started to bend things. Rods, we would make, they had other experiments too, like trying to cause a fuse to go off early that was in a little fuse box. It might go off in 20 seconds, and our job was to try to make it go off in like 10 seconds. And I found out that if you press down on the fuse, it would look like it had blown. Then I would switch it for a blown fuse.
Wow.
And I came up with a lot of, basically they would present me with things that they wanted me to try to do, and I would always say yes. And within a few minutes, I usually came up with a way to do it.
So they thought you were gifted in some paranormal way, and they were never skeptical that you might be a kid doing magic tricks.
You know what? I can't tell you what was in their head. As far as I know, they were never skeptical. Not until Randy presented some evidence to us that we might be cheating.
Right. Did they ever come close to discovering you before that? I mean, that you were a fraud who was kind of working with Randy in this way?
This is an interesting question because after everything came out of the Time Life building, where we said we were fakes, basically, they had a spokesperson come out of the woodwork, somebody we had never met before from McDonnell Douglas, and said, look, these kids had been asked. You know, they were asked if they were tricksters. Now, two of the things that Randy had said in the very beginning is, well, one of the things, actually, was if they ever asked us if we were magicians, we had to say yes, and we were working for the amazing Randy.
You mean that he told you, rules of the game, if they ever ask you if you're a fraud, you fess up?
Absolutely. They never asked that. They never did research into our backgrounds. In fact, if they checked Mike's background, they would have seen that he was an escape artist. He was a magician. They never checked my background. Had they checked my background, I had already been prepared by Randy for it, and I was out there already saying that I was genuine because we knew that at some point we were going to try to introduce me to a lab. Didn't know what lab. Turned out to be this one in the end. They never asked us. What Randy did at one point at a magic convention, he put out a little bit of a rumor that he had something going, you know, that he was trying to fool some scientists. And then at a parapsychological convention, same ones that Peter Phillips were attending, he put out two rumors. The first rumor was the correct one, that Mike and I were working with Randy to try to fool the Mac Lab, which was the McDonnell Laboratory for Psychical Research. The other one was that the Mac Lab professors themselves were working with the amazing Randy to try to fool the rest of the scientific community. So what happened when we came back after they had been at that convention? They came to Mike and I, and they said, you know, we heard some rumors at this convention. And they said the first rumor was that you and Mike were working with the amazing Randy to try to fool us. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, and Mike was too, oh my God, okay, this is the end, this is it. And they started laughing. How ridiculous is that? We heard an even funnier one, that we, the scientists, were working with Randy to try to fool the rest of the scientific community. So they had a good laugh about it, and they thought that both rumors were absolutely ridiculous.
Wow.
It was never a thing of confronting us. It was a thing of telling us how silly these rumors were that they heard.
I'm interested in whatever happened to these researchers. I mean, they really had the wool pulled over their eyes, and this kind of blunder, it could kind of be a career buster.
Well, you know, when we went in originally, Mike and I, we just felt that it was us against the enemy. You know, we never realized that these people were good people, that they were going to be our friends. And they were good people. They were very, very good people. Basically, they were just in an area that they shouldn't have been in. They were using money that they shouldn't have been using to conduct tests that they shouldn't have been testing because they just didn't have the skills to do this. And it turned out in the very end that when we came out and we said that it was all an illusion, what they did was they wouldn't answer their phones until Mike and I called them. And then it was a consistent thing of, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And, of course, there were some things that were coincidence. You know, there were some things that I just took guesses at, and I couldn't explain those things. But those were few and far between. It's going to happen when you're making a lot of guesses. After that, Peter Phillips kind of dropped off the radar. One of the other professors that were there, he kind of just went off. He still worked in the parapsychological area. He still was teaching people how to expand their minds and how to do ESP experiments and things like that. Now, more recently, I was contacted by somebody, and they've actually written a screenplay about Project Alpha, and they spoke with all the scientists, and my understanding is that they were all on board with this as well, and they were going to show the movie from both points of view.
Wow.
So now they're just trying to raise money for the movie.
Well, count me in. Yeah, that sounds excellent. And what a great way to raise consciousness about how easy it is for scientists to be beguiled.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the funny thing was we stayed at Peter Phillips's house, and on his bookshelf he had magic books, and that was one of the things that made us really cautious because we thought he must know something about magic. But I'm guessing he just didn't look at them or just didn't associate the two.
Or, yeah, didn't connect the dots, didn't realize, like you were saying before, hey, I'm a scientist. I might have a cognitive bias that says I'm super smart, therefore can't be fooled. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you know, it's much smarter to be able to say, you know, I don't have all the evidence. When I lecture sometimes at colleges or at schools, one of the things that I do is I perform first, and then I'll ask, especially at high schools, I'll ask the kids, you know, raise your hands if you thought this was genuine, and most of the hands go up. And then I'll say, raise your hands if you don't think it's genuine, and a few hands, maybe 4 or 5 hands will go up. And I'll ask them specifically, I'll say, why don't you think it's real? And they'll say, because my dad told me so, or because I read it in a magazine, or something like that. And I say, well, you know what? You're right. And a big smile goes across their face, and I say, but for the wrong reasons. These other kids had something they couldn't explain. They witnessed something they could not explain. You're basically going on what somebody else tells you. You're much better off saying, I don't have enough information. I don't have the skill set. I simply don't know. I'm skeptical about it, but I don't have enough information.
That's an open-minded kind of skepticism, and I want to finish up talking about that. But before we get there, so you did Project Alpha, and you kind of stuck with deception or performing like that, started performing theatrically. Eventually, you'd go on to be one of the most sought-out campus entertainers out there. You did corporate stuff. You still do that, and you're one of the most widely regarded thinkers in the field as well. So a lot of magicians not only look up to you, they flock to your lectures, etc. You've done consulting with really every TV magician out there. One of the most beautiful, really the perfect example of dramatic magic that I've seen, Penn and Teller's version of the bullet catch. You had a hand actually in creating that.
I did. I was actually performing a bullet catch back in 1985 with a partner. We would do it at nightclubs, and we did it many different ways. My partner was a stunt man. Sometimes he would be set on fire, and I would have to fire it. He would have a full regala on where he's set completely on fire, and we would shoot a bullet from across the room, a marked bullet into his mouth. They would put him out, and he'd call the bullet. We did all kinds of weird, different, crazy versions of this.
Right. This is a classic in the history of magic, the bullet catch. You had your version.
Yeah, there's been quite a few people killed doing it, and I had my version, and I always thought my version was 100% safe. It was only 100% safe method that I knew of ever that I've ever come across. And then one day, Penn and Teller came to town, and they came to my house, showed up in the most ostentatious limousine you've ever seen. Those are Penn's words, and it was huge. It was longer than my house itself. And they came in the house, and Teller said, Randy said, we should ask you to stick in a videotape. And I stuck in a promo tape, and they watched it. I think they were just being nice. In fact, one of the funny things about this was when they pulled up, my wife said, if you guys like to take a shower, feel free. And she's so used to me being on the road and coming home, and that's all I want to do is come in and take a shower. I said, honey, they're staying at the Ritz. I think they're fine on that end. So they watched this tape, and then we went to go see their show. And that Sunday, Teller said, look, I'd like to talk to you. He called me. He said, I'd like to talk to you about the bullet catch. And I said, well, how did you know about that? Because on the VHS, it was only about 3-4 seconds it mentioned the bullet catch. And you see me, shooting a bullet. And that's all that you see. And I had even forgot it was on the VHS. Mm-hmm. And he said, it was on there. I said, really? I don't remember. And I went back, looked, yep, sure enough, it was there. So I went to the hotel, took my gun, the stand, took everything that I needed, and started talking to Teller about it. And Penn's sitting in the background. And halfway through, Teller says, this will work. I mean, this is safe. And Penn says, what, bullet catch is safe? And Teller said, yeah, sure. And Teller said, I'd like to pay you for it right now. I said, no. I didn't want any money for it. They'd helped Randy through the years, and Randy had helped them. And basically, any friend of Randy's is a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. I said, no, I don't want any money for it. They said, no, we insist. I said, tell you what, why don't you take my gun, because that's what they wanted to take anyway. Why don't you take everything, play with it, and if you think you can do something with it, come back to me, and maybe we'll talk about it then. And now, this is 10 years later from when I invented my version. This is now 1995. And
you're no longer doing it in a show?
I was doing it once in a while, but I had worked with a partner, and then I started doing it solo when I stopped working with a partner and basically had a grip that held the gun. But I wasn't doing it that often, maybe once a year, if anything, at that point. Mm-hmm.
So they came back to you eventually, and...
Yeah, they came back. I mean, they did it right. They went to the FBI. They, took gun lessons. Basically, they really, really did it right. And finally, at one point, Teller called me, and he said, look, I would like to bring you in this Saturday. I think it was like June 10th, 1995, and they were working Bally's at the time. So they brought me into the 9 p.m. show. They flew me in, put me up in a really nice hotel. My wife couldn't make it. I had 3 bedrooms, and I called Teller. I said, I don't need 3 bedrooms. Why do I need 3 bedrooms? He said, you know what, just sleep in one night, the other one the next night, and the other one the next night. Don't worry about it. So I went to go see it, and it was fantastic. I mean, they had basically taken what I had given them. They had taken bits and pieces from my method. They had changed it, and it was now really almost beyond recognition. I mean, it was something that was perfectly Penn and Teller. Mm-hmm. And not only that, they have a few different versions, which is unheard of with the bullet catch.
Well, it is among the most beautiful magic I've ever seen live. It's just amazing.
Thank you. And I'm very humbled by the fact that they close every single show with it.
Mm-hmm. So, Banachek, looking back at Project Alpha, these Wash U tests, all that, then looking at your career after that, your influence in the magic world and your consulting in the way that you just mentioned Penn and Teller, but also, well, just really it's a who's who. You like every famous magician anyone's ever heard of, you've somehow been involved kind of behind the scenes or something. You've been on TV a bunch yourself. But you haven't just stuck with performing. You're not just the mentalist, the mind reader, the thought reader, you've stayed with the skepticism, this kind of skeptical activism. Maybe that's not how you'd characterize it, but you can plot a trajectory of the magic to the skepticism. And even now you're involved in testing paranormal claimants. Like last year at the Amazing meeting, you conducted a test of the European psychic Connie Sam.
Yeah, I felt that it's been very important to stay within the skeptical community for numerous reasons. I mean, who better to catch another magician when they're saying that they're genuine? You know, this is what I do for a living. And I'm in that area where it's not just magic, it is mentalism, which is very closely related to what some of the psychics are doing, you know, and this is where I learned. I learned from them in the early days. You know, I used to go back in the books and read about how they exposed some of the so-called psychics, and I took some of their methods and I enhanced them and I improved upon them, and that's pretty much how I've gotten really well known within the magic community, was creating and taking those tools and creating new effects. But yeah, when it came to Connie's song, I was approached and asked if I would be willing to test her. And I said that I would be willing to do that. Now, the protocol was put in place, not by myself or by other people. My only job there was to make sure that she was not cheating. That was the only job that I had. She agreed ahead of time that I could be there. She knew that I was a magician. She knew that I was a mentalist. She said 100% that it would be fine. She agreed to all the controls, which is exactly what they have to do. She was very, very polite. She was very, very easy to work with. I was not allowed to meet her ahead of time, but she was just, it seemed as if everything was going to be absolutely 100% perfect.
Right, very sincere. Didn't seem like a huckster.
No, not at all. No, when you start to, I gotta say, when you start taking a look at some of her background, and you start looking at some of the claims that she was making, there seemed to be a little bit of huckstery going on there, a little bit of publicity. But I stepped beyond that, which is something you have to do as an investigator. You have to step outside of yourself. You have to come in with a clean, open mind. You have to be fair to them. And that was my job, I felt, was to give her all the respect that I could. Because here is somebody that's saying, look, I'm going to come in front of all these skeptics, and I'm willing to let you test me live. And for that, I had respect for her.
And that test at TAM, it was leading up to the $1 Million Challenge, which is Randy's offer to pay anyone who can prove their supernatural abilities under actual test conditions. What? Mutually agreed upon scientific conditions.
Well, the $1 Million Challenge has been there for quite a while. It originally was I think Randy had $10,000 when he lived up in New Jersey. And then I think he spoke with Penn and Teller. I can't say for sure, but I think this is the way the events went. And I think he was given the idea to go ahead and take donations from people. People basically, well, not donations, but people were saying, look, if somebody wins wins the $1 million, then I'll put money towards that.
Yeah, they'll pony up, almost kind of sign a contract or an agreement that if Randy discovers true paranormal abilities in someone, that all these people who have made pledges pony up their money and pay the person the $1 million.
That's exactly right. But it turned out that wasn't good enough for some of the skeptical people. Well, when I say skeptical people, I don't mean the true skeptics. I mean, say, magicians posing as psychics at times that like to give Randy a hard time on some of the networks and the boards. They said, how are you ever going to get that money? There's no way to be sure of that. So Randy went out of his way, and he found somebody who would put the money in escrow, so the money was there. Even if people didn't pony up, the money was there. Now, people pony up, and that money gets deducted from the money in escrow. But anybody going for that $1 million is guaranteed to get $1 million if they pass the protocol.
Right. And you just mentioned the boards. You mean like the magic message boards? Every sub-community has its own...
Unfortunately, they do. Unfortunately, on those boards, what happens is you tend to get people that are magicians that like to get a lot of publicity for themselves, and so they start screaming and hollering that the test is unfair or this is unfair, and they just, any way that they can get attention, they do so.
Among that subculture, these kind of closed online communities where, magicians and mind readers and mentalists are all talking, really the most controversial thing you could bring up is like James Randi. People get really riled up.
It's amazing. There are some places and some that I joined, some memberships, where people hated me just because of my association with Randy. I mean, it was amazing how venomous they could be. It was and the hateful, mean things they would do or say.
When in fact he's done so much good for society, it's just kind of a skewed view, I think.
Yeah. No, it is. And there's usually an agenda there. I mean, there's definitely almost always an agenda when people start attacking Randy. And that agenda usually comes from the fact that they want people to think that they're genuine themselves. Usually. Not always, but usually.
When we were talking about Kani-san, you mentioned having a clean, open mind, your phrase. I want to finish up by talking about being open-minded while at the same time advancing skepticism. You resist this whole debunking thing. You know, some skeptics, maybe they're beleaguered by the claimants. You know, they don't take it seriously anymore, so they, in a knee-jerk way, they just say, this stuff can't possibly be true. Come on, these are idiots or liars or frauds or charlatans or something. And they kind of begin with the conclusion that the claim is impossible. That's not you, though.
No, you know what I have found through the years, that when people start to do that, they belittle the very people that they're trying to convince. And as a result, they put up walls. They don't break walls down. You're much better giving people information so they can make a decision for themselves. Now, this doesn't mean exposing magic, because when you start exposing magic, what you do is, I think sometimes you set people up. It's much better to let somebody know that they can be fooled rather than always showing them how they were fooled.
Yeah, so a little ounce of magic is not going to make you a socket buster.
I think that's a dangerous thing to do. I think what you can do is, I mean, I have 10 ways to bend a key. If I teach somebody one way to bend the key and I say, this is how you do it, they think they have all the ammunition they need. And now they get themselves into situations where the psychic or the so-called psychic is going to be able to take them down very, very quickly. Or they put themselves in a position where they see something and say, you know what, this has to be genuine. I know the trick method. This has to be real. So again, you set them up for failure.
So magic informs skepticism, but it doesn't follow that every skeptic needs to learn magic tricks.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think you're much better off as a skeptic to be able to sit back and say, you know what, I don't have enough information. Let me call Banachek. Let me call the amazing Randy. Let me call Jamie Ian Swiss. Let me call somebody who has that knowledge, somebody that can help me.
Right. Banachek, we just scratched the surface. I look forward to continued conversations about all this stuff. It's really interesting to me, as you know. I appreciate you joining me on Point of Inquiry.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Where can you turn to find others like yourself who appreciate critical thinking? Turn to Skeptical Inquirer, the magazine that separates fact from media myth. It's published by the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Find out what genuine science has to say about the extraordinary and the unexplained. You'll be surprised. Subscribe to Skeptical Inquirer today. 1 year, 6 challenging issues for $19.99. To subscribe or request a sample issue, just call 1-800-634-1610 or visit the Point of Inquiry website, pointofinquiry.org.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Point of Inquiry. To get involved with an online conversation about today's show, join the online discussion forums at pointofinquiry.org. Views expressed on Point of Inquiry aren't necessarily the views of the Center for Inquiry nor its affiliated organizations. Questions and comments on today's show can be sent to feedback@pointofinquiry.org or by visiting the website pointofinquiry.org. Point of Inquiry is produced by Thomas Donnelly and recorded from St. Louis, Missouri. Point of Inquiry's music is composed by Emmy Award-winning Michael Whalen. Contributors to today's show included Sarah Jordan and Debbie Goddard. I'm your host, DJ Grothy.